Hello everyone, my name is Chris, and today we're going to be looking at how to replace the subframe bushings on an E39. Particularly, we're going to be looking at how to replace the subframe bushings on my E39 Wagon, as well as some of the differences between sedan and touring subframes, and what you might need to convert a traditional 5 Series Wagon into a M5 rear end. We're also going to be looking at what the differences are between a sedan and a touring rear end, so you understand what you can reuse and what you can't reuse. Most importantly, today we're going to be replacing the subframe bushings with Powerflex bushings. These are going to be a huge upgrade compared to the rubber ones that come from factory, shown here. A lot of damage on the rubber ones. You can kind of see there the cracking that happens, and you get a lot of play. That is just unacceptable level of play there. And the fact that it can move around on its own is horrible. So the street Powerflex bushings are going to be a perfect upgrade. We are going to get less drivetrain power loss. One thing that you might have to consider when doing these is that you might get a little more cabin noise. Although on the inside of this Wagon, I actually did a lot more sound deadening material. I can show you guys some footage on what that looks like if you'd like. So comment below if you want to see how the sound deadening was done in this car, and if you want to see me do it on the door panels. Now this is probably the hardest thing you're ever going to do on your BMW. Honestly, between changing a head gasket or anything else, I think that doing subframe bushings are daunting. The best way to do it is going to be using a special tool like the one that we have here. So here we have the instructions on how to use this special tool. It looks like it's made by Koch Tools, and there's the part number if you're interested in buying it. This is an expensive tool, although luckily we were able to rent this tool from a fellow enthusiast by the name of Jedi M5 on the forums. Also, he runs Einhorn Industries. So I'll go ahead and tag them here so you can check out what they do. So now that we've got everything unpacked here, this is going to be the main tool to remove the old bushings. I'll show you how that works in a second. This is going to be a ratchet that they included to actually make things easier, because I don't think a lot of people would have a ratcheting open-ended wrench like this. Here we have some of the tools that we're going to need to maybe get the new bushings in, although I think we might just be able to hammer those in because they're not rubber bushings. And here are the tools that you'd be using if this was a sedan. So yes, this tool is made for a sedan. I would highly recommend borrowing this tool instead of buying it to save yourself the cost, and it's going to save you a lot of time compared to any other method. This is how the tool looks installed. To remove a bushing, essentially you're going to have this central stud that's going to grab the cap right here, and the cap is going to be pulled through the subframe, taking the bushing out with this right here. So here's where our 24-25 millimeter ratchet is going to end up, and we'll just pop these bushings out one at a time. There's 4 of them, and so let's get to it. So now I'm going to show you just how easy it is with this tool. No kidding, I'm so glad that I rented this out, and it makes this job 100 times easier. I tried getting out one of the bushings already with usual methods that I might use to get out a subframe bushing, but did not come out. So here's how it's going to be set up. First, we're going to go ahead and take our cap that's going to get pushed through. Notice it has some earlobes, and put it on the top there. It's gonna sit nice and flush. Then we need to get our tool, loosen it up, put it on. So I like to go around the outside, bring this in, tying this up. Not too much, just enough that it's gonna grab onto the edges. Bearing, don't forget the bearing. So grab your 19 millimeter on this end and 24 down here. Watch how easy this bushing comes off. You already see it moving right there.
At this point, you can see that the bushing tool goes really precisely in there. So there's a little bit of, you can see some rubber coming out the sides, but it's a really precise tool. And here's the most satisfying part of it all, is when it comes out caged by this awesome tool. So in most cases, a Powerflex bushing is easier to install because it comes in two pieces. Separated in half, you really only have to install it from the top and the bottom. So it sandwiches in. These are really slippery already. They're made out of, obviously, that polyurethane, which is actually pretty bouncy. And then you're gonna have a central spacer, which is gonna go inside of it, and that's what is gonna be able to allow a stud and bolt to compress and keep the spacer in. But keep in mind that the factory suspension has a, basically this is gonna get sandwiched on a flat surface, and this side's gonna get sandwiched with a flat surface. So it'll get compressed, and that's what's gonna absorb road noise and vibrations and stuff like that. Also included is this great Powerflex silicone lubricant. This is gonna be great to help install these. You can use a little bit around the outside right here, although these I wouldn't be so worried about installing. You're gonna really wanna apply it on the shaft of this spacer right here. That's gonna make it a lot easier to go into the bushing once you've installed it. So first, we're gonna go ahead and take our top piece, and that's gonna go on top. Sandwich that in by hand. Now we're gonna take our bottom piece. Again, that goes in by hand. So not a lot of force needed. That is what your bushing looks like installed, essentially. And then we're gonna take this and lube it up right now. Now that this big metal spacer is lubricated, we're gonna go ahead and put it in here. I'm doing this one from the top. Keep in mind that these do have a recess that is gonna be facing upwards towards the sky. Similar to the OEM bushing, here's one of the ones that I really messed up, but small hole on the bottom, big hole on top. Small hole on top, big hole on the bottom. So that's what we're gonna do. Press it in a little bit with your hand, and then go ahead and get your hammer. So you'll notice after pressing this in all the way, this with the other side is probably gonna pop out a little bit. Now you could try to put your hand there to keep it in an upright position, or keep it into the subframe while you get the guide through. But realistically, when the subframe goes up, the bolts and washer that's gonna come right here is gonna sandwich this, compact and center everything. So not a lot to worry about. Now we can take a look at our final product. I think it looks pretty sweet having Powerflex bushings in your subframe. Obviously the only way that this would look better is if I had already replaced the differential bushings, but I think that's next on the list. We're gonna replace those before the subframe goes in. So now we're gonna talk about some of the differences between a non-M and an M5 rear subframe, and what the differences are, I guess, between the sedan and the touring. So, first things first is a lot of people might say, if you're gonna do an M5 swap, why wouldn't you try to swap the M5 rear subframe? And the reason being, the sedan subframe will not fit on a touring. So the mounting locations are different, and the suspension type is different as well. You're gonna notice that on a touring, the E39 actually had a split strut and spring setup. So, on a sedan, for example, the spring would be over the strut in a coilover type orientation. But here on the touring, you have the option to use a steel spring, or in some models, self-leveling suspension was available. And that gave you the option to have an airbag, which would level the rear end of the car, dependent on the ride type, how much weight you had over the rear seats, over the rear axle, and all that sort of good stuff. My car fortunately came with the springs setup from the factory. So this gives me a lot of option because I don't have to code anything or remove any extra pieces if I want to do a custom air setup, or even if you wanted to do coilovers, for example. Now, one thing to consider too is that on the sedan and touring, they both use the same differential mounting points, and they both use the same length axles. So essentially, the differentials and axle shafts for sedan and touring subframes are interchangeable. So that means that I can easily take out the automatic transmission differential in the back here and swap it out with the M5 rear differential, and I can also put in the M5 axles. So that is convenient on the touring, and of course you can do the same thing on the sedan as well. It's completely interchangeable with non-M and M5. Here's taking a look at the M5 rear differential. Notice the huge fins at the bottom here. That is the factory 528i automatic differential back there. Over here we have the axle shafts as well. You can see the larger one on top being the M5 and the smaller one on the bottom being the standard 6-cylinder axle shafts. Here you can see the difference. On the right we have our larger M5 caliper. On the left we have the 528 caliper. So now we're going to talk about what you need to do to convert a non-M rear brake setup to the M5 rear brake setup. So the parts are a little bit different on the rear of a touring in terms of the dust shield, for example, but otherwise the brake caliper is going to be same mounting bracket placement and measurement between sedan and touring and M5. Now in this scenario we have a standard 528i, and we're trying to convert the small 6-cylinder piston, which is for some of the early models, as well as for the lower horsepower cars. They used a smaller brake caliper in the rear than the stock rotor. The hub here was painted when we were replacing the bearings that are behind here, but you'll notice that there's no dust shield, and that's because when we converted to using the M5 rear brakes, the rotors are bigger and they're hitting the dust shield, so we cut it all off. And so taking an angle grinder, cutting all the way around the edge of it, all you really need to do, and that way you're ensuring that it's not going to come over and touch right here. Now, something important to note between sedan and touring is that the rear brake line position is different. So on the M5, the rear brake line actually points in towards the strut, but on a standard sedan or touring early model caliper, it's pointed upwards, which gives you more flexibility. On the touring, the brake line points straight, and so that's why we couldn't even use it on this one, because the location is different and it would still have the same issue. So we're gonna have to get custom stainless lines made back here that are gonna have an elbow it's gonna point away from the strut, just to make sure we have clearance. And lastly, one problem you're gonna have between all E39s when you go to M5 rear brakes is that the M5 rear rotors have a different locking bolt setup than the non-Ms. So the hub is different, and that's what causes the orientation difference. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's no way that you could lock this rotor down to the hub and still have access to all 5 bolt holes. That means that you're gonna have to line those bolt holes up and then put your wheel on. It can kind of be a pain, but if you go to studs, that's gonna make your life a ton easier. So we'll probably end up going to studs for sake of keeping the rotors aligned all the time and putting our wheels on. And so that would solve that issue. So I think that just about covers everything that is going on with the rear end in terms of the E39 M5 wagon, what we're doing for brake setups, what's going to fit on a sedan versus a touring subframe. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to send me a message or leave them down below. Like the video, subscribe if you want to see more updates about this build, and I really appreciate the support. So until next time, see you guys.